first we want to turn to the presidency. In the run-up to this election on Thursday week, we've been taking time to create a rounder picture of the individual candidates, and so far in our series of presidential profiles we've looked at Dana, Sean Gallagher, Michael D. Higgins and Gay Mitchell. Now our next candidate under the spotlight is a poet, a fisherman, a chess player, a family man, described as considerate and thoughtful, somebody who cares about nature, especially the rugged heaths of Donegal. But no, this is not some dreamy liberal. This is Martin McGuinness, icon of Republican militancy. And we're joined now by Mick Clifford, who's been covering the presidential election for the Irish Examiner. Mick, Martin McGuinness, he's a difficult man to put in a box, isn't he?
He is indeed, Shane. I suppose if life is a journey, he could certainly claim that he has covered an awful lot of ground in that journey. From the bog side, he was a teenager when the British troops came into the north, when the civil rights movement started going, and they were constantly harassed, beaten back and disrupted. As we know, there was an awful lot of injustice in the north end. Catholics were to a large extent second-class citizens, and Derry had its own particular problem in that the majority of the people were Catholic, and you can imagine how they felt that in their own city they were effectively second-class citizens. That was the milieu out of which Martin McGuinness came. He joined the IRA as a teenager. He obviously made a serious impression on people in terms of his ability, because when he was only 22, he was among a delegation that included Gerry Adams, who was also a very young man, who were flown over to London to discuss whether there could be a ceasefire. Now, McGuinness initially joined the IRA. Soon after he had joined, there was the split between officials and provisionals. He went with the provisionals, and that consolidated his position. He went on to be a leading member of the IRA. Certainly all of the accounts, both favourable and unfavourable towards him, state that he was the leading, he was the head of the IRA in Derry. He was certainly a leading member. He was the chief of staff at one stage, and he was also reported to have been on the Army Council. By his own account, he joined the IRA in the early 70s, and he left after coming out of prison in 1974. He had 2 spells in prison, both in the Republic, and he says when he came out, I think it was in November 74, he got married soon thereafter, and he decided he was no longer going to be part of the armed struggle, although he never disowned it, and he became a leading member of Sinn Féin. Now, the one point that could be made about that version is it was given in the Savile Inquiry a couple of years ago, which we know was involved in looking into Bloody Sunday and the murder of 13 people that day by the Parachute Regiment. If Martin McGuinness had claimed, as Gerry Adams does, that he never was in the IRA, that could have had repercussions for the people of Derry who were at that inquiry and who were looking for some justice, in that if he gave an implausible account of where he had been on Bloody Sunday. Therefore, he said he was in the IRA, but he claimed then that he left a couple of years after. Of course, as we know, there's hardly a person on this island or further afield who believes for a second he was anything but a leading member of the Provisionals, all the way up to the ceasefire in 1994 and indeed beyond.
Okay, now you mentioned obviously his role in the IRA in Derry, and the IRA in Derry were, I think in the early 70s, they were regarded as a ruthlessly effective organisation, but maybe less sectarian than elements of the IRA in other cities. Perhaps that was due to as you said, the predominance of Catholics in Derry, but they certainly targeted the commercial centre of Derry, which was blown up on numerous occasions, and there was also numerous gunfights with British Army soldiers. I think something like a couple of dozen British Army soldiers were killed on the streets of Derry in the early 1970s. And certainly, I mean, whatever Martin McGuinness says, he's regarded very much as an iconic figure in militant republicanism, isn't he?
Oh, he is. And I mean, you know, if you were to take his story at face value, you have to accept then that, as you said, he was the iconic figure of militant republicanism. Could he have been that iconic figure if he were not in the organisation himself? I remember, by his account, he must have been about 23, 24 when he left. Could he have been an iconic figure. Would the hard men of the IRA, the likes of, we know the names, those who were on the Army Council and who famously acquiesced to the ceasefire in a meeting in North Donegal there, I think it was in early 94, would they have listened to the likes of Martin McGuinness and Gerry Adams if both of them had come exclusively from, over the previous 20 years, been on the political wing, as opposed to being involved in the military arm of it? I mean, it's just entirely implausible that he was anything but a leading member right through that time.
When did he begin the move from militant republicanism into a more political path?
It was around the late 80s that a lot of the movement began with senior Republican figures, both himself and Gerry Adams. And I mean, it should be said, we've concentrated on his IRA movement, the part that he enjoys projecting. He definitely deserves huge credit for that as well, as in himself and Adams in particular began realising that militarily they weren't going to defeat the British, and that therefore there had to be another way forward. There was exploratory talks. They also realised that what came out of the hunger strikes in 1981 was a realisation that politics could be a way forward. When Bobby Sands got elected, and subsequently I think it was Owen Carron who had been Sands' election agent, they realised there could definitely be a way forward through politics. I think the realisation also came upon them that they weren't going to defeat the British militarily, and then movements was made definitely in the late 80s towards negotiating some sort of a ceasefire, and from there we had the Hume Adams talks that eventually evolved into the peace process. But McGuinness was definitely central to the whole thing, and a lot of commentators who are very familiar with it would suggest that there is no way it could have happened without McGuinness's full backing.
There's no question, though, he has been an extraordinarily successful politician. I mean, whatever about his past, he took to politics very well, highly regarded as a minister, and has got on very well with both First Ministers, Ian Paisley and his predecessor Peter Robinson, or his successor rather, Peter Robinson.
He has been, again, as I say, he really epitomises the journey that he has come along, and one could say the same for Gerry Adams, but in terms of politics, McGuinness more so. I mean, as you say, he's managed against all the odds, and very likely he probably would have been a more reviled figure than even Adams among the likes of the DUP. Against all the odds, he's got on extremely well with Paisley and Robinson. And also, purely in terms of electioneering, it's noticeable during this election. I mean, I was out with him, and as a campaigner, the man is top class. He has a genuine warmth for people. Some politicians are awkward, but McGuinness is a genuine warmth for people. He's very good at making connections with people. He has time for everybody. I mean, he was great making connection with kids even, and I followed him down around Ringsend in Dublin, and they were lining up afterwards to get his autograph. There's the element of the rock star about the guy, but and then in an executive role, and he's regarded as having done very well in Northern Ireland as Deputy First Minister and Minister for Education. So there's no doubt he definitely brought the hard wing of the Republican struggle with him, and he has also shown himself in this new guise to be a very good politician. Now, one would have reservations about, there's a difference between that and running for the presidency. I mean, to my mind, the big issue there is it is completely unfair on the other candidates, because a certain amount of the presidential election is about character, which is about record. All the others are forced to engage on the basis of their records, whether it be David Norris's letters or Mary Davis's quangos or whatever. Yet McGuinness doesn't engage because he denies that the record that everybody believes he has exists at all. Therefore, he doesn't have to engage on the basis that he was a leading member of the IRA for 20 years. And to me, that makes his campaign a bit of a sham.
Does he genuinely want to be president, or is it about building the Sinn Féin brand in the south, and then Martin McGuinness going back to his old job in Northern Ireland?
I would guess, Shane, and it could only be a guess, that if he were to be elected president on a personal level, the man would be devastated. In terms of what it would mean for his party, he'd be over the moon. Because, I mean, whatever one may think, certainly you couldn't question the dedication of the main people in Sinn Féin, apart from the fact that they give most of their salaries to the party. There's no doubt they're all focused on the project, as they call it. far more so than on a single issue than, for instance, ideologically than most of the other parties. But as you say, the main, I wondered, did they ever really believe they could win? But the main thing from their point of view is he would increase their popularity and make it easier for people to vote for Sinn Féin in elections hereafter, and particularly now that the party is on the rise. I mean, some people would suggest that one other element to his campaign is to retrospectively legitimise the armed struggle in Northern Ireland, and that a vote for McGuinness would be a vote to do that. I don't know whether that applies. That's certainly a theory, but it is certainly about far more than the individual himself. And on a personal basis, I would say that he may well be going forward purely for the party rather than any wish at all to be president himself.
Although I presume standing there in 2016 at the centenary of the 1916 with the flag flying proud, that would be a nice moment for him, wouldn't it?
Oh, it would be huge. I mean, it would cost him 7 years of his life. But I'd say for somebody who's been involved in that struggle since he was a teenager, I suppose he'd probably consider it worth it. But I mean, there still is a huge chunk of the population that have a major problem with where he came from, in that it's not that long ago that the armed struggle was still going on. It's not that long ago that the IRA were involved in the Northern bank robbery, that Jerry McCabe was murdered, which is something we related down here unfairly in some ways, because he was one of hundreds, if not thousands, of victims. But none of that is that long ago, and people still have a major issue around that. And the second issue is the fact that he denies it ever happened. And remember, he gave that evidence on oath at the Savile inquiry in a jurisdiction where he's an elected politician. If, as most people believe, he is willing to lie about that, could he be trusted as the first citizen?
Last question on Martin McGuinness, Mick. I mean, most people have regarded this as a masterstroke by Sinn Féin in terms of building their brand. But is there a danger it could backfire for them? I mean, they've reminded a lot of people, this campaign rather, and Martin McGuinness's past and all the focus on it, has reminded a lot of people about where Sinn Féin have come from. Is there a danger that particular younger voters, when rehearing all these stories or hearing them for the first time, maybe turned off Sinn Féin?
There is that danger. I would imagine that it's more the upside probably has greater possibilities for them, but there is definitely that danger. It's also the case, I would say, that older people have greater reservations on the basis that they have memories, personal memories of what went on in those times. But there would be that danger. Now, so far in the polls, he's doing all right, but not great by any means. And it's probably no coincidence that we saw in the last opinion poll that Sinn Féin is now the second largest party in the state. You'd imagine they got a bit of a boost from that. The huge question from their point of view is, when it's all done and dusted, and presuming he doesn't win, will the bump in their support, will that stay, or will it drift away again? And I mean, ultimately, that'll decide whether it was worth it. It's far too early to say yes, whether or not there'll be a backlash against it, or whether it'll have turned out to have been a masterstroke.
Okay, you're listening to Lunchtime here on News Talk. Shane Coleman with you this afternoon. We're talking to Mick Clifford, who's been following the presidential election with the Irish Examiner.